Chapter 0. Cheating the Rope. Once, we believed in the future. There was going to be a brighter, better, more advanced tomorrow back then. A golden age of expansion and discovery, as a human race, freed from the tyranny of scarcity and commerce, took to the stars. There may indeed have been lovely spandex uniforms for everyone. That was before the war against the first other sentience we found, and the realization that we were effectively children by comparison. They only did what they did as a kind of offhand slapdown, a jocular little nudge to put us in our place. The result? 3,000 years of internecine warfare, isolation, darkness, plague, famine and strife has not so much shattered our illusions about our better nature as proven their point about us. We're all bad monkeys, and if we're to get a banana at all, it's likely to be somewhere thoroughly uncomfortable. Excerpt from Where Shit Be At by the Central Scrutinizer. The sky was teal when he looked up at it for the last time. A dirty blue-green, hazed to deep turquoise directly above, where the thin atmosphere gave way to space. A bead of sweat rolled down his cheek, and the noose chafed at his neck. Ezra Ashdown was not having a very pleasant morning. Some people have said that there is such a thing as a good day to die. The evidence suggests they have not tried dying enough to really form a solid opinion on the subject.
Come on,
he caught himself thinking.
Just get it over with. It's not as if there's going to be a last-minute pardon coming, not in this town. If it was any less friendly around here, people would have to start beating themselves up to stay in practice.
The wood of the gallows creaked underfoot. Dry, warped timbers bleached to the colour of bone by two suns. Beside Ezra, the hangman flexed his fingers on the drop lever. Its handle was worn smooth, largely on account of the man who had convened this little party. Mason Stockton, mayor of the town of Last Chance. A man so hard and crooked you could use his soul as a drill bit.
Sermonizing bastard. Ugly, too.
Ezra turned his head as best he could, straining against the 13-ply knot at the back of his neck.
You think we could hurry this up a bit?
He asked his executioner.
I hear the devil has that obsessive thing. Neat, punctual. Like them fellas that collect little spoons.
He lowered his voice to a whisper.
Between you and me, I think he's a bit crazy. His daddy was a right bastard.
He spoke out of the corner of his mouth, but his eyes were on Stockton. The tall, thin man in the pinstriped three-piece just grinned, slumped back on his barber's chair. It was a smile with far too many teeth, set in a face as dry as jerky. The kind of face which licked its lips inappropriately and giggled while reading obituaries. An aide, the size and shape of a refuse skip, held up a tiny umbrella to keep the blowtorch suns at bay. Another, this one with the hunch and beady eyes of a carrion bird, held a pitcher of whiskey and ginger lime. The ghastly profusion of teeth split wider.
Oh, by all means, Ashdown, laugh it up. Just remember, the sand rats are gonna be chawing on your bones by nightfall. Ain't nobody cheats me, not in my own town. Got me one more skull to prove it come tomorrow morning.
The reason why, the sheriff, stood behind Stockton's chrome and rosewood barber's chair like a stump-legged bomb shelter. It was ancient, and more than little bit hinky around the processes, but it was relentless, the same way old age and winter are relentless. Its tiny cluster of red eyes peered out from under a rusted cowling, on which was imprinted the seal of the Humanic Panarchy. It knew, in its heart of hearts, that it had been built as an industrial-grade soup vending machine. Some mad warlord, back in the distant past, had fitted it with the kind of guns which tell you a lot more than they intend to about the human race. Not a man among those assembled could read the Panarchy chop, or knew the slightest thing about what it meant. No, you'll be getting on your way down to Lucifer, and you tell him who sent you. But first... And here the long, lanky mayor produced a pack of playing cards from his waistcoat pocket. "You gonna tell me how you did it?" Ezra laughed, and it came out as a dry-throated croak. "Not a mighty big incentive for me to cooperate, is there now? And in any case, I reckon it's more fun if you just think of it as magic." Stockton's eyes narrowed behind his wire-rimmed spectacles. He half stood from his chair, gripping the pack of cards in one white-knuckled fist. "Magic? If someone pulls a damn rabbit out of their fundament in my town, boy, it's 'cause I put it there. And you think this is a hard goodbye, boy, you can think again. I've got ways to make you..." Mason Stockton would not have called himself a racist bastard. Few of them do. But he was able to ladle more loathing over the single word boy than your average frothing jackbooted dictator can cram into a whole moustache-chewing rally.
"Gravitic signature detected,"
said the sheriff, its voice a hollow tin can echo.
"Class 5 AG vehicle in breach of the 10-mile exclusion perimeter."
Now what in the hell?
Asked the hangman. He spat a vast, vile wad of soggy tobacco from the slit in his hood.
Can a man just do his goddamn job here, Stockton?
The mayor's eyes narrowed behind two crescents of smoked glass. His long grey moustache twitched as his smile compressed down to a bloodless line.
"Or the damn fool thing spouts off like that from time to time never signifies a..."
"Targeting scan pulse registered. Caliber unknown. Manufacturer unknown. Advanced LiDAR and thermal imaging projectile guidance capabilities indicated. Today's special is cream of mushroom with a sprinkling of organic sourdough croutons and parsley."
The man with the umbrella, the gunslinger, Tasker, snapped open a long Cerametal telescope, the sight, if only he had known, from a long-defunct Mark III Weatherfield Quantum Cascade energy carbine. Despite looking like something scraped from the bottom of a deep fryer, the man was a demon on the trigger.
"There's someone out there, about 3 long yonder. Got themselves some steel, but I can't see what use it's gonna be at that range. Big bluebelly loper, too. Fast one."
Stockton snapped the scope from his lackey's hand, making the gunslinger gum one bloodied knuckle. He laughed uproariously, rocking his barber's chair back on its legs.
"Hear that, Ezra? You've got a rescue party. I've seen this in the Magic Lantern shows. Some hair-trigger sumbitch pings the rope while you're doing the necktie two-step. You fall through the trap and there's a couple of guns under there for you to grab." He leered. "Thing is, not even dear old Mr. Tasker could make that shot. Not at 300 yards. Your little pal's been reading too many penny dreadfuls."
Ashdown grimaced. The rough hemp rope grated against his 3-day stubble, salty with sweat.
"News to me,"
he said, and he meant it. A half-assed rescue was not even on the list of his last forlorn hopes. Even a quarter or 1/8 assed attempt, perhaps by Boy Scouts armed with papier-mâché weapons, was well off the books at this point, and fading fast. The hangman shrugged.
"Last news you'll get,"
grinned Stockton, pinching his fingers together. A cloud of playing cards fluttered away on the hot breeze.
"Pull the damned lever."
"Nothing personal,"
came a muffled voice behind the black hood.
just a job and all. I have a wife and kids I need feeding. A little junior is off to executioner school next year, and the missus needs a new Sunday cowl.
Greased wood clunked and slid, and Ezra Ashdown fell, caught up short by the noose around his neck. It wasn't a swinging spine breaker. No, Stockton had wanted him to suffer. Either that, or he wanted to gloat. The last fellow who'd tried to execute Ezra Ashdown had insisted on singing show tunes while dressed in fishnet stockings and little else. That had been one dinner theatre he'd never recommend again.
Incoming fire. Permission to engage,
boomed the sheriff, revealing a brace of gleaming chrome weaponry. Something hummed up the scale out of human hearing, setting Ezra's teeth on edge. It sounded impressive, but was in fact a sonic gazpacho whisk. Stockton peered through the scope. Tasker's hand hovered, twitching, over the butt of his gun. The gunslinger's face was twisted into a doughy squint.
Well, looky here, one-handed, God be buggered. This'll be some sport.
There is a certain type of person who actually says, well, looky here. They are the same type who asks city boys if they's lost, while smiling lecherously and holding shotguns. You don't ever need to feel bad about what happens to them. The first shot took the rope clean, and even from 300 yards out, all assembled could see the twin shockwaves spinning through the dusty air. The load was angel's hair, a diamond thread razor pulled taut between two micro-missiles, and it sheared through the hemp with a sound like tearing paper, then went on to paint a thin red line diagonally across Tasker's chest. He grunted, then blinked, then his left arm, the one going for his pearl-handled six-gun, fell off at the shoulder.
Fuck me,
he managed, before the better part of his torso slid sideways, leaving the rest of him cut off at the sharp angle of a calligraphy brush. Nobody felt the least bit sorry for him. Weeks later, when his aged mother received the news by telegram, she pulled the cork from a bottle of sherry with her teeth and eventually had to be crowbarred off the local schoolmaster, one Mr. Lawrence Prendergast.
Permission to engage,
repeated the sheriff, folding out even more glittering tubes and barrels from its inner recesses. Behind them, a whole stand of gene-factored cigaro imitated Tasker's slice and slide.
Beef and bacon is a hearty winter broth, best enjoyed on those cold nights around the fireplace.
Light her up,
yelped Stockton, rolling off his barber's chair and into the sand.
Paint the walls with her. What in the hell?
The second shot was haze, and it popped into spherical micro-munitions about 2 arm spans above the gallows. Violet billows of gas blew wide, rendering the light of the twin suns a grainy purple. The eye-watering cloud bought Ezra some time. He hit the ground on his arse, looking up, and what he saw brought a very genuine and heartfelt smile to his face. Taped up against the boards were a pair of ornate silver pistols, gnarly 7-shot revolvers packing magnum rounds the size of a fat man's thumbs. The tape which held them in place was utterly alien, thin, oily, and nearly transparent, but he recognized the names etched into their barrels. His granddaddy's guns. Time for some family fun. And next to them, a tiny black tube with a rubber mouthpiece. Ezra rolled to his feet in a single movement, coming up from under the gallows just as the haze began to clear. Trouble, the gun on his left, roared as he squeezed the trigger, blasting a fist-sized hole clear through the executioner.
Nothing personal. It's just that a good tight noose should kill a man clean. Can't stand sloppy workmanship.
The man looked at the hole. There were bits inside, smoking, that nobody this side of breakfast should rightly want to see.
Now that's what I call an execution. Mister, I'd like to shake your hand. I'd like to put aside what I see now as the childish and clumsy gallows and study under your tutelage the way of the...
Ezra winced. It was a bad time to have second thoughts about your calling in life. It was, in fact, a bad time to think that you had anything in life at all. He caught a twitch of shadow off to his right, and he extended his arm in a fluid motion, flicking his eyes down the barrel of Strife. Behind him, the hooded hangman toppled off the gallows platform, smoke coiling up from his hollowed-out chest. Stockton's goon had a pitcher in one hand and a nasty sawn-off in the other, but he was mazed by the effects of that violet gas. Before he could blink the tears from his eyes, Ezra had pulled the trigger twice, shattering his cut-crystal jug of whiskey and ginger lime, then drilling a neat hole between his eyes. The impact sent the man's corpse flying backward in a full cartwheel, ending with the meaty thwack of his temple against a rock. Nobody ever learned that his name was Algernon Weeks, that he owned a pet lizard called Gerald, and that in his spare time he liked to embroider pictures of tricycles on small throw cushions. Sideshows, both of them. Ezra spat the rebreather out of his mouth as the last of the gas blew away, looking for Mason Stockton. 5 in one, 6 in the other. No way the weasel was going to slither out of this one. A drift of playing cards whispered underfoot as he kicked over Stockton's barber's chair, both guns held out before him. Ez was so mad that he didn't even try to imagine a weasel slithering. He'd kill for a cigar about now. Then again, he'd kill on general principle, just as soon as... There. The mare was mounting up, throwing one pinstriped trouser leg over the broad back of a loper. The low-slung beast huffed and snapped its metre-wide jaws, but the harness and bit between its teeth held it back. With a tug of the reins, Stockton brought the loper up and around, pointing its flickering blue tongue toward Last Chance. Ezra steadied his aim, breathing deep. Trouble and strife were heavy in his hands, and he could feel each bullet in its chamber, patiently waiting to fly. He closed his eyes and squeezed both triggers. A violet flash threw him backwards an instant later as 2 copper-jacketed slugs of lead evaporated in the air. The same blast took the barrels off Trouble and Strife as neat and clean as a barber surgeon's razor, leaving him with 2 metal stumps.
You have been disarmed. Submit peacefully, and there'll be no need for further violence. Would Sir care for an additional bread roll?
Ashdown spun on his heel, bringing his 2 truncated pistols up to face the sheriff. Useless, he knew. Not only was the damn thing built god-awful tough, his guns were now about as accurate as a madman's horoscope. He spat.
"Seems you're only gonna have to kill me again, Engine," he said. "And that didn't work out well last time. Why don't you just use those fancy shooters of yours and save the mare a few feet of rope?"
The machine clicked forward on its stubby insect legs, red eyes glittering.
Look, I get it. You're one of those man-with-no-name types, riding about, dispensing hot justice like it was the soup of the day. We get a lot of them. But Mayor Stockton hates, well, he calls it silly drama. And he is the proper civic authority.
Ezra stared past the rusted metal flank of the sheriff to where a flash of light on metal winked in the distance. He still had no idea who would even want to save him.
"The civic authority is hightailing it out of here, and more to the point, he's so crooked you could use him to uncork a nice Pinot Noir."
It's not for me to speculate on politics. I exist solely to enforce. Tell you the truth, I rather like it. And of course it sounds a lot better than I exist solely to serve soup.
"Seems to me that most of old Stockton's waking moments constitute a crime, big fella. Enforce away."
If you're trying to confuse me with a paradox, you're wasting your time. That kind of thing hasn't worked since they fixed up the poor old Mark 12s. Head explosions. Between you and me, they were just reinforcing negative robot stereotypes.
Ezra put up his guns, pointing them at the pale teal sky.
"Actually, I was just trying to distract you with bullshit. But it was nice talking to you."
He didn't have any idea what an EMP missile was, having grown up in Harrow, a world where the last word in technology was huge, steam-powered, and less efficient than a chocolate flamethrower. But he knew enough to throw himself to the side as a hissing chrome tube hammered into the sheriff from behind, toppling the machine from its claws. A raving blast of violet licked into the sky, passing right through the spot where Ashdown had stood. A small trickle of very nice leek and onion soup gurgled from within the downed engine. Reflexes, learned over a lifetime of hurried escapes, kicked in. He rolled to his feet, the chopped-off noose hanging down the front of his shirt like a necktie. He heard the soft sound of a loper's wide footpads on sand behind him, and he spun, both guns extended, only to find himself staring down the muzzle of the biggest, meanest pistol he had ever seen. Ezra Ashdown experienced a pang of terror, envy, and pure covetous lust as he recognized the gun. There was one in the museum in Hook's Harbour, a relic from the War of 915.
"That's a problem solver,"
he breathed, watching his exhalation mist against the chrome of its foreplate.
"No wonder you cut the rope from 3 clicks out. But where did you... and how? With the..."
His eyes performed a blink and refocus, blurring the cavernous maw of the gun and snapping to the face of the woman holding it. Her voice cut through him like hot wire.
Well, I'm going to be in trouble for the missile anyway, so why not have some fun?
He swallowed hard. She slid down from the saddle of her mount while keeping the vast black eye of the pistol steady. A woman with a gun! It was sacrilege, of course, in the straight-laced, orthodox spiritualist society of Harrow. And yet the form-fitting buckskin dress and tasselled coat which she wore left Ezra under no illusions. A web of what appeared to be occult sigils, but was in fact a laminar energy absorption system, peeked out at the collar and waist of the two-piece frontierswoman's costume, while her hair was bound back into a long black braid under a derby hat. Her eyes were almond-shaped, as violet as the sheriff's particle beams, and her lips were powdered with some kind of dark cherry-red gloss, which was all the more apparent when she smiled.
The only personal handgun with industrial infrastructure,
she said.
Except no imitations.
If she had started reciting the painfully erotic haiku poetry of the libertine scribes of Kesh Neng, the mystery woman could not have seemed more alluring. She spun the pistol on one finger and dropped it back to the holster at her waist, where a powerful magnetic field held it in place.
So tell me, how were you going to stop that engine of yours?
Ezra blinked.
"Sheriff? Well, I was working on something. And you sort of took the initiative with that, well, whatever that thing was."
Type 23 one-shot electromage nullifier. Central have plenty more where that one came from. But your so-called sheriff is getting up. You might want to convince me that rescuing you was worthwhile.
From somewhere on her person, and where a good orthodox boy should not have cared to speculate, the strange woman had produced a thin metal tube, glowing red-hot at one end. She drew on it deeply, like a small chrome cigar, before exhaling a cloud of cinnamon-sweet smoke in his face.
Come on, I don't have all day.
Ezra held out his hand for the problem solver. The dark-haired woman shook her head and smiled. She had the same kind of dark, fizzing intensity as a fully armed bomb. The kind which you know is doing bad things to part of you, possibly on a cellular level.
Do this one little favour for me, and we might be able to find you one of your own,
she said.
Though I totally didn't say that, and you've only ever seen one in a museum.
Behind her, the sheriff finally managed to extend an arm from a badly corroded flap on its back. It hinged itself upright with a groaning creak of metal. 3 very old sachets of instant ramen spilled onto the desert sand.
3,496 years. So much soup. All hot, all very nourishing. But do I get any respect? Oh no. Not even when they gave me all these big shiny guns. It's always, this bouillon is cold, Unit 101100111101. There's a fly in my cream of chicken, Unit 1011001101.
Were you going to help at all?
Non-interference in primitive affairs is supposed to be rule number 1 where I come from.
Isn't it a bit late for that?
I don't know.
she said, taking a step backwards.
That's kind of the part I'm going to be in trouble for. But it looks like we're about to find out if there are any survivors. So, you know.
She shrugged.
It could all sort itself out neatly. For me, anyway.
There was no way of knowing the real emotional state of the sheriff at any given time, but Ezra wagered that it was none too happy right now. A haze of smoke spiraled out from a popped seam of rivets down its flank, and one of its gleaming chrome cannons hung loose, sparking erratically.
Final request. Disarm and submit. Failure to do so will result in the application of lethal force.
Ezra took his thumbs off the hammers. He put his hands up, once again pointing the ruined trouble and strife straight at the sky.
Okay, you got me. Just leave the lady out of this. Not her fault I'm so damned handsome. Most any dame would have done what she did.
Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a single raised eyebrow, along with a wry little smile. Something in Ezra's grizzled soul twinged. Perhaps you really did think he was handsome. The sheriff, on the other hand, was past being reasonable.
Negative. The possession of military hardware by civilians is a level 27 offense. Lay down on the ground, please, your hands behind your head, and submit.
Ez saw what he needed, right on the edge of his vision. A flat-headed nail hammered into the wood of the gallows. It would have been an impossible shot, even with both barrels of his guns intact. All he needed was a distraction.
That,
said the gunslinger,
is no way to talk to a lady.
Then he dropped his guns down and fired. The sheriff, being a Panaky Integrated Systems Type 9 soup synthesis unit, possessed reflexes far in excess of even the most lethal gunslinger. Some said that these machines, in their heyday, were able to deliver nourishing hot beverages before the customer had even made his selection. But, as it had also not received regular servicing and maintenance for the better part of 3,000 years, and as it had been crudely soldered together with the mind core of a fist corp Type 9 violence unit, its body could barely keep up with its silicon matrix brain. Ezra's first bullet clipped the tip of its one remaining particle cannon, spinning it away as a beam of energy burst from its muzzle. Cactus crisped and evaporated to his left. But it was the second shot which the condemned man was focused on, the trick shot which caught that protruding nail head on an angle, ricocheting it back on a flat trajectory. Ezra could feel it with his mind as he spun in slow motion, a weight distorting the treacle-thick air, and one he could reach out and touch. There, just right. Time unfroze, and Ezra caught a faceful of sand, knocking the wind from his belly. But he heard that cross-cut slug clip neatly through the gap in the sheriff's armour, clattering around inside the engine's corroded shell. Any number of carefully calibrated and unspeakably ancient circuit boards were mashed to shards and splinters by the flying hunk of lead. Somewhere in the core of the machine, a micro-tokamak fusion reactor spun loose. Magnetic containment fields popped one by one. The heart of the machine, a molecular soup synthesizer of unspeakable power, finally collapsed in around its central wheel of antimatter. Ezra just had time to curse. The explosion blasted a sheet of pebbles and sand at him as he tucked both arms up over his head. When the after-echoes rolled away, he saw what was left of the sheriff collapse, a sad little heap of burned and twisted steel. It had been peeled open like a can of beans, fire licking up from inside. The smell of burned powdered tomato filled the air.
I'll show you goddamn worthwhile, he muttered. Damned hangmen still have my hat too, probably gone to charcoal.
His erstwhile rescuer was sitting on a rock not far away, as if the detonation hadn't fazed her in the slightest. A flicker of blue light sketched facets and planes around her for a second, then faded. Her loper, on the other hand, had skittered for cover like the giant lizard it was, and peered back at the pair of them from over a nearby dune with a very hurt expression.
Nice. I can see what they were talking about back at Central. You have my attention, Mr. Ashdown.
He picked himself up from the sand, wincing at the sharp pains which speared through his neck and shoulder. Being the guest of honour at a hanging was hardly therapeutic.
That's what it takes to get your attention? We're both lucky that neither of my damn guns jammed.
The woman stood, brushing a fleck of sand from her shoulder. She raised one eyebrow.
Anyone else would have told me they were lucky not to miss, which just goes to show why my interest is appropriate. You're an aberration, Ashdown. A psionic. And where I come from, we need people like you.
Ezra chewed this over for a second. Now that the adrenaline was fading out, and his surprise at still being alive was in check, he decided he didn't like this lady's attitude. He felt like a sample on one of Doc Ethan's microscope slides, all pinned down and bloody.
They've called me a witch before, and a cheat, and a lucky son of a bitch,
he said, slipping his granddaddy's guns into the empty holster at his belt.
But never a, whatever you said, abbreviation. Psychotic now, that's a new one too.
He stood over her, a good head taller, he noted, and went to pluck the chrome cigar from between her fingers. She twitched it away, then thought better of it, and handed it to him.
What I mean is, you can control small objects within your body's electromagnetic field. It's quite a skill, and it means that my boss would like to offer you a job.
The smoke was surprisingly smooth, mildly narcotic, and sweet as honeyed almonds. He still almost choked on it.
You know all about me then?
Not all of the insects you've swatted in the last few months have been flies, Ashdown. We've been spying on you.
Even when, you know?
He made vague hand gestures of a lavatorial nature.
Especially, you know. We need the laughs where I work.
The sunburn covered most of the cherry redness which advanced across Ezra's face.
Then you know I've never worked a day in my life, and certainly not for blood money.
We don't expect you to,
she said, smiling brightly.
If you manage to kill Mason Stockton, it'll be strictly an extracurricular bonus. No, what we want is a little more complicated.
Ezra passed the cigar back, shaking his head. The last thing he needed was complicated.
Oh, no. No. And don't think because you saved my life that I owe you one either.
The woman adopted a hurt expression.
And our insect said that you were such a gentleman. Let me put it this way. Do you want to expand your mind? Visit new worlds? Battle insane monsters against impossible odds? Play with hardware powerful enough to shatter whole planets? Potentially save the human species and become a veritable saint among gunslingers?
Ezra squinted at her, his head cocked to one side.
And if I say no?
Then you're a sad, pathetic little insect, and I'll put you right back on that gibbet,
she said, all gleeful enthusiasm. Something about her smile, and the way that an explosion which had felled the sheriff hadn't even singed her eyelashes, made him stop and consider before he laughed in her face. He considered the laugh. He even got so far as to having third considerations about the state of his breath during it. But, well, it had been an awfully long time since he talked to a lady who didn't ask him for a precise figure in coinage beforehand.
2 things,
he said.
1, I want my own problem solver. And 2, I'd like the courtesy of knowing what your goddamn name is.
She came in closer, wrapping her arms around his neck. He was painfully aware, with the clarity of feeling due only to those who have just cheated death, of her vanilla and jasmine perfume, and the curves beneath that buckskin and leather 2-piece. He gulped.
As for number 1?
She whispered, staring up into his eyes.
I think I can definitely help you. Or at least my friend Wainwright can.
She ran a finger along the stubble of his jawline, then tapped him on the chin.
You two should get along famously. As to the other...
Any thought of a kiss evaporated as a sharp pain sparked at the nape of his neck. He felt a barb pierce his skin, then a hot, sticky sensation, as of thousands of tiny insect legs burrowing deep. Gasping, Ezra drew back, fingers scrabbling at a dome of smooth metal.
My name's Tia Faraday, lately of the Agency of Central Scrutinizer, known as Plausible Deniability.
Ghost sparks whirled and flickered behind his eyes. The world tilted sideways as he crashed to his knees on the hot sand. Two suns, one indigo, the other orange, blurring into one. He looked up as she stood over him, and the last thing he saw was her smile.
I'm your parole officer,
she said. And then the darkness rushed up to swallow him whole.